You are waiting for an elevator. The doors aren't opening fast enough, so you reach out and hit the lit button again. At a craps table, players who need a high number will physically hurl the dice as hard as they can. If they need a low number, they tend to toss them gently. Both of these behaviors are expressions of a deeply ingrained cognitive bias, known as the illusion of control. Humans systematically overestimate their ability to influence events that are governed entirely by chance. When we jab an automated button or try to muscle a probabilistic equation, our brain is actively misinterpreting its relationship with reality, providing a false sense of agency where none exists. In 1975, Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer published a series of experiments investigating why we so readily confuse games of chance with games of skill. In her most famous study, half of the participants were randomly handed a lottery ticket, while the other half were allowed to choose their own ticket from the stack. When researchers later tried to buy the tickets back, the participants who had chosen their own demanded significantly more money. Simply making a choice gave them a sense of psychological ownership, leading them to act as if they had improved their actual mathematical odds. Langer discovered that our environments are filled with skill cues. When we encounter elements like choice, competition, or physical involvement, our brains instinctively apply survival-based skill logic to random noise. The moment we desire a specific outcome, the boundary between actual skill and blind chance disappears. This cognitive shortcut is called the control heuristic. When we take an action and a desired outcome follows closely in time, our brain interprets that temporal association as empirical proof of causality. Using event-related potentials, researchers can track how this false sense of control warps our reward processing in real time. The hardware for this error is the ADDS theory. When you believe you are in control, the medial temporal lobe signals the nucleus accumbens to disinhibit the VTA, increasing the number of tonically active dopamine neurons flowing into your prefrontal cortex. Because the dopamine system encodes reward prediction errors, it chemically reinforces the neural pathway of whatever useless action preceded a random success, cementing the behavior at a synaptic level. When you tap that elevator button and the doors happen to open, you are responding to a chemically reinforced superstition. The gambling industry designs machines to specifically trigger this biology. Electronic games use physical stop buttons and programmed near misses to transform random algorithms into perceived games of skill. In financial markets, where daily movements are stochastic, traders often overestimate their predictive abilities based on their perceived strategic insight. This fuels the sunk cost fallacy. Investors will pour capital into a failing venture, believing their sheer willpower can eventually force a market correction. In healthcare, diagnostic overconfidence leads physicians to bypass algorithmic safety checklists, relying instead on intuition to manage complex, uncontrollable patient outcomes. This neurochemical reinforcement drives systemic market failures, millions in lost savings, and avoidable medical errors. Beyond casinos and markets, this bias serves as a last resort defense against terror. In abusive relationships or dynamics of coercive control, the loss of autonomy is so absolute that the mind manufactures a sense of influence just to function. This manifests as behavioral self-blame. By internalizing the fault for the abuse, a victim can maintain the belief that if they simply act perfectly, they can prevent future violence. It is a way to find order in a dangerous and inherently unpredictable environment. We see a different repulsive disorder. Clinical studies reveal that OCD patients actually suffer from a deficit in this illusion of control compared to healthy individuals. Because they cannot intuitively feel a normal baseline of agency, they rely on rigid, repetitive compulsions to artificially simulate a sense of safety and certainty. Whether it is internalizing blame for a traumatic event or executing a compulsion, the human mind will manufacture a perception of control to avoid the collapse of motivation. This reveals that perfect rationality is not the goal. Individuals who possess a highly accurate view of their lack of influence often succumb to depressive realism, a state of crippling apathy. Psychologists Taylor and Brown demonstrated that a mildly inflated sense of control is a foundational hallmark of mental health. These positive illusions act as a psychological buffer, lowering stress responses and enhancing resilience during medical adversity. This optimal peak is the Goldilocks zone. On the low end, a lack of perceived agency leads to depression. On the high end, excessive perceived control results in reckless hubris. Human ambition requires an unwarranted optimism against objective odds. Without this modest irrationality, we would rarely undertake high-risk endeavors like scientific innovation or entrepreneurship. Because this illusion is an involuntary neurochemical reflex, we cannot rely on willpower or statistical literacy to override it in high-stakes moments. Effective mitigation requires structural debiasing. Organizations use pre-mortem analysis, assuming a project has already failed, to force the analytical mind to identify flaws the intuitive mind prefers to ignore. Critical environments implement forcing functions. Healthcare systems use mandatory cognitive timeouts to break diagnostic momentum, and gambling policy removes skill cues like stop buttons from slot machines. These policies create a choice architecture. They are hard constraints designed to protect our analytical reasoning from our own dopamine systems. You cannot control the randomness of the universe, but by understanding the mechanics of your own mind,